welcome to we're back to our kitchen table.
Yay!
I'm sitting here with my wife, your therapist, and today I've accumulated a bunch of questions from the internet, the questions that people have for therapists.
Thanks, Internet.
Thanks, Internet. We love going to you with for content ideas. They're really interesting questions. Some of them are a little more lighthearted than others.
And I haven't heard any of them before, so
Brand
I'll
new.
be answering in the moment.
Yeah. So we're going to just be going through this list of questions that people want to ask a therapist, and we're going to get your take on them. I thought, as I looked through the list, I was like, there are some things I think your response might be kind of standard, but then there were others that I was like, I don't think that her response is what people would maybe expect for it to be.
We both know my autism loves being on the spot, so I can't wait. No, I really am excited. I love getting to answer real life questions.
Right. Before we jump in, we don't run ads. We're not out here trying to convince you to play Raid Shadow Legends or download NordVPN or sign up for BetterHelp or whatever bullshit.
Don't sign up for BetterHelp. That's, yeah.
That could be one of the questions we might get to.
Okay.
So we're not out here. All I'm going to ask in exchange for me not reading ads to you, which feels, share the podcast with a friend. Let somebody know. Find somebody who you're like, they need help. They need help. I'm going to send this to somebody.
You need a mental health podcast.
Yeah, you're acting really fucked up lately, and I have a mental health podcast for you to listen to. Be very passive-aggressive about it, and send the podcast to your friend, because my dream in life is to get paid to talk.
Is that the goal here?
Yeah, so if you guys can all band together and help me achieve my dream of being able to podcast professionally, that would be pretty sick. That would be pretty fucking cool,
Cool.
Okay. Well, as ever, my name is Price, and I married your therapist.
My name is Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not the same thing as or a replacement for therapy.
Nice.
Okay.
You ready to do this?
Let's do it. Hello, Internet. What do you have to say today?
Have you ever wished you could just be friends with a client instead of being their therapist? And if so, what did you do?
Oh, I think all of my clients are literally the coolest people I've ever met, every single one, and I want to be friends with everybody. Not really. Okay, so I think everybody who comes in...
Did you just think of somebody specific? You're like, no, fuck that.
No, there are some people who come in and I'm like, this person is way too cool to ever be friends with me. We would never make it.
Oh my God, that Gen Z kid's got a dangly earring and tattoo sleeves. I'm so intimidated.
Cool. I was never cool ever one day in my single life.
Oh my God, he probably had an iPhone during high school. I didn't have an iPhone during high school.
Yeah, no, I think everybody's great, and there are a lot of people where I'm like, I think that we also would have hit it off as friends. But what I always come back to, and what's easy for me to come back to, I don't feel like it's a struggle for me to come back to, is that the reason I'm getting to have this sort of encounter with them and see their authentic self is because I'm a therapist and because this is the space for it. And if you feel like you're friends with your therapist, the important thing to keep in mind is like, this is a specific space that lets us get to know each other. And I don't think you can get to know somebody on a really deep, personal, authentic level and not find something you just adore about them. So I feel grateful to be able to provide the space as a therapist, and I know that they're going to go out and be better friends to other people and that we're not going to be friends.
That was a small thing to say with a huge implication. I don't think I can get to know somebody on that level and not find something to adore about them.
I fully believe that. There are some people who come in for their first session and we're immediately like vibing. It immediately just works really well. And a lot of people who come in for a first session and they're not able to be fully authentic, they don't feel safe in the space yet, and we don't immediately have that connection. But as they start to be more of who they are, like just deep down.
As you peel back the onion layers.
Exactly. They're like wildly hilarious and insightful and thoughtful. And I swear I've never met a client who got to the point where they could really open up authentically and I didn't just adore them the person in front of me. And sometimes I feel very aware out in real life we wouldn't have become friends. Like we wouldn't have hit it off. You wouldn't have liked me. I wouldn't have been drawn to, like, we just wouldn't have clicked. But in this space with you being real and authentic, you're so lovable. Like, there's just so much about you to be into. And it makes me so happy because once they get to that point, people in therapy do start making friends. They might have been a loner for a long time. And they'll be like, hey, I started meeting people. Oh, I started dating
Oh,
somebody. I
that's
started
cool.
doing something. And that's cool. And I can't do that as their friend.
So you're kind of demonstrating to them, like, hey, there are people out here who like you for you.
Yeah, you down at your core, you're great. Like, do this, do
Yeah.
more of this. And they go do that. And then they make great friends. And I
What
love
are the
that.
things? Okay, so I feel like I can imagine or even can think of people who are going to therapy with a therapist who is just 100% on their team and adores them.
Yep.
But they're a real fucking asshole.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that you have clients who have friends and family members who think that they're a real fucking asshole. And I'm sure.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, you have clients that are like, yeah, I adore them, but I can objectively see how somebody might reasonably call them an asshole.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fair, right? Like,
Yeah, no, there are some people who I know aren't well liked in their life. I think often the specific clients I'm seeing, they're not well liked in their families because they're trying to really dig in and figure out some family trauma, and that's rarely welcomed in a
oh yeah,
family.
you stir that pot, man. Everybody, all of a sudden, everybody's mad at you.
I tend to feel like even the clients I have who aren't well liked in their life, it's because people don't they get one view of them. Um, I can't think of any clients I've had where we've really gotten into it and I didn't think that, like, man, if people could see this side of you, everybody would
Well,
like
you
you.
were talking to me about that with the internal family systems,
Mhm.
like ideology or
It's a
a
theory.
theory. Thank
Mhm.
you, and how or you were talking to me about how when people start questioning their role in their family because everybody has like a role
Yes.
that that's hard for the rest of the family to like cope with when I'm like, hey, I don't want to be the family punching bag anymore, you know, so I'm trying to step
Yes.
away from that.
Okay, so yes, exactly. What you're talking about is that families work as a system. It's not an individual group of a bunch of people, it's an individual group of people who create a shared unit. And that unit, that system, has to maintain a sense of equilibrium. And so often in a family that's got a lot going on, there's somebody who becomes the holder of all of those things. Like a family that can't deal with its own issue will definitely have at least one kid who's being hospitalized, who has to go to rehab, who goes to jail. They're like, that's the issue in our family. It's you. Because we as a system can't deal with the fact that our system's broken. So there's a person who's responsible for it. Or everybody has been maintaining this great equilibrium and all is well and happy on the surface. Maybe underneath that's not what's true. And somebody goes, I think something's wrong with our family. And everybody goes, I think something's wrong with you. Even if you've been the golden child, even if
Right.
you've been in a very acceptable spot, that system might reject you because it can't bear that something's wrong with the
I
system.
think there are a lot of people who can relate to that. Like, I was the family fuck up, and it felt like that. They decided that. It didn't feel like earned as much as it was just like the role I had to play. You know.
And the hard thing is when people have decided who you are, especially when you're a kid and you still haven't decided who you are,
Right.
everything you do is going to confirm that. Like
Yeah.
the good things you do are going to be like, man, despite being the fuck up, you've done this thing. But everything else that you do that's wrong is going to play into that. Unlike where your role in your family is being the family golden child, then everything you do is like, man, maybe even sometimes the golden child messes up, but it's not viewed the same way. And that like story of who you are keeps getting handed to you again and
It makes me
again.
think of Malcolm in the Middle.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that show?
Yeah?
God,
Dewey?
dude. Francis, the oldest son,
Uh-huh.
is like the fuck up from the beginning. Like
Yeah.
he's super smart. Like he's got all of the attributes of like a good human being, but
Mm-hmm.
he's just ostracized, and they send him to like military school, and they send him to Alaska, and he's just like not in the family because he's just a fuck up.
Yep.
And that's kind of like rings very true sometimes.
And the other thing that happens is that not only are our roles like given to us again and again and again, but we also start to live into them. If you're labeled as the family fuck up, well, I might as well do this thing. I might as well hang out with other kids who are the fuck up. I might as well get into trouble because everybody expects that anyway.
That's easier than bucking the system, right? It's easier to like just follow your orders than it is. Nah, interesting. Okay, we kind of did a tangent there.
I was expecting that to be a really quick answer, but yeah, definitely. I think that plays into a lot. Also, I wanted to clarify, internal family systems is the way that a family system plays out inside of us, that we all kind of have a system of different parts of us that interact with one another. You might say there's a part of me that wants to do this and a part of me that wants to do this, and that's kind of you describing that system. Family systems is just describing a family unit.
Got it. Okay, so back to the original question. You want to be friends with a client.
Yeah, so I know that I'm just the therapist, and I really love that role.
You're so much more than just the therapist to me.
Well, that's the whole point of the show, isn't it? I am so honored to get to be a therapist. I never think, man, I wish I could exchange being a therapist for being their friend. I'm in a very privileged position to get to be somebody's therapist, and I don't take that lightly. But the aspect where that friendship feeling comes up is just that, all of the time. I think this is such a wonderful person, and anybody would be so lucky to be in their life. Something that was really impactful for me growing up, because I didn't have a great self-image, but my mom, every time we were laughing together and having a good time, she's like, I can't wait to see who you're in a relationship with, because that person is going to just be so lucky to be around you. And that's the way I feel around my clients, is it's not a feeling of like, man, I wish I could be their friend instead of this. But I do think, man, whoever gets to be around them all the time, like that's a really lucky person. And I'm excited to see how this unfolds. And if they're not being treated well by the people around them, I'm like, fuck all those people. I hate them. I can't wait for people who appreciate you.
I just think you've said something really beautiful here, which is that no matter how, fucked up somebody can be or how difficult somebody can be, that there are aspects of all of us that are really beautiful and getting to the core of somebody. Because we build up these the things that are so difficult to be around are like learned behaviors because we're trying to just survive, right?
Right.
And so and I'm not saying that you can be nasty and ugly and that's not like on you. Like you have to accept responsibility for that. But like there's a beautiful sort of like philosophy here, which is that getting to know somebody, they can be a really beautiful person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. A lot of people hear about just really accepting clients as they are. And I think the old system, the old way of thinking about it is like, well, then they're not taking any personal responsibility for who they are. And I don't think that's it at all. I think that when somebody really gets loved for who they are and who they can be, like who they are at their core, they start to reject the parts of themselves that aren't. Not reject them, but they start to go, ooh, I don't want to be this person. I'm not that person. Well, I want to be able to do something else. And they do apologize and they do take responsibility.
Just like the family fuck up learns to be the family fuck up. Mm-hmm. If you change the narrative like, hey, you're not a fuck up.
Yeah.
Then they start not being a fuck up. Like, how amazing is that?
Right. They're like, oh, I want to shed this bit of me that actually isn't who I really am.
Yeah.
It's a story that's been handed to me.
No, I've got a younger sister in her early 20s, and just like any person in their late teens, early 20s makes mistakes sometimes.
Yeah.
And for a while, I wanted to show love and guidance and explain how she fucked up. Mm-hmm. And it took you explaining to me. She knows.
She knows. She hates it.
She doesn't need to hear from me that she fucked up. She fully understands that. So I changed tactics a little bit. Now I'm only praising. Now I'm only calling out when she's getting shit right. Guess what? She's getting a lot of shit right a lot of the time.
Well, a tip for... Oh, I'm sorry. I totally interrupted you.
No, go. You're good.
A tip for therapists out there, or a tip just for you loving other people in your life, is listen to the whole story and then just call out what went well. And in some people's lives, it's hard to call out the things that went well because they are living under that narrative of being the fuck up or of struggling. But if you just keep going, man, despite all this that was tough, you did this thing really well. And then wait until the next time. And then they start doing that for themselves. And they start living more into the narrative of like, man, things are hard for me, but I really am very caring about the people in my life, or I really am trying to do this different thing, and they live into it.
Well, it feels like this is a very general analogy. Don't get too laser focused on this, but it's like a medical doctor. A lot of their job is to enable the human body to do what it does best, which is to heal itself, right? So I'm trying to clean out infection. I'm trying to make sure that this environment is perfectly suited. I'm stitching you up, right? The stitching doesn't connect the tissue back together. The human body does that, but we're just creating the circumstance where you can heal. And that's like what good therapy is I'm going to just enable you to do what you're going to do, which is you're going to heal yourself. So I don't need to just be here pointing out look at how far this
look
gap
at how
in
much
your flesh
infection is in here. Look at how much this
is awful. You need to do something about this. That doesn't help your patient at all. Help them get ready to do the work
let's
themselves.
get some of this infection out. Let's give your body the space and time it needs to heal and rest.
Right. And what I'm seeing with my sister or with other people in my life and even with myself is that the healing does happen. You don't have to hyper focus on people's failings. They are aware. They know.
They know. And honestly, they expect that from you. And it's what stops them from being able to share with you what's really going on.
Yeah.
You're going to miss the whole thing if that's what you focus on.
So we're not living in joy and strength and happiness. We're living in shame and fear.
Oh my gosh. I had a client, I had a couple of intakes this week, and I had a client say...
an intake is your first session.
Yeah, an intake's a first session, so we're going through the whole thing. And now I completely lost what I was going to say.
I'm so sorry. You got to be able to hold on to a thought. You sound ADHD right now.
I just get so in on whoever's talking in front of me. I'm like, yes, what were you saying, Bryce? And I forget.
So we were talking about positive affirmation.
Oh. Somebody was talking about other therapists who've used shame with them. Okay. Who've tried to shame them into, for instance, maybe somebody's smoking cigarettes. And instead of being like, man, you must really need to be coping with something to need that nicotine and to need all of that, somebody being like, don't you know smoking's bad? And we're joking
it's bad.
I never thought of that before. There haven't been 100 campaigns to tell me that all throughout my life. I know. I need something about it.
As you're well aware, I was a pretty heavy smoker for many years. Started in high school. And I would get approached by people way more often than you would imagine who wanted to let me know that was going to kill me. And every single time they did that, I would start hacking up a lung and be like, it's gonna what? What do you mean?
But it did nothing to change your mind.
Of course not. I know I know what's going on. Jesus Christ.
A lot of the times it's that's the fucking point. Yeah, I know. Don't I know? That's what I'm hoping.
I'm more than happy to sacrifice long-term health for an immediate...
Right, over the fact that my anxiety is so bad, I need to feel a sense of relief.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right, well, that was 20 minutes on that first question.
Perfect.
More like 15.
What's
more like
our
15.
Second and last question?
All right, so not all of these are super PC. These are just human beings asking questions, so let's go for it, okay?
Oh, no. Therapy's only allowed to be PC. I will not allow. Okay, sorry, continue.
Can a mentally ill person be a psychologist or adjacent career path?
Okay.
They do a little explaining, a little clarification of what they mean. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Can a mentally ill person, or they just repeat the title. I have OCD and wondered if I could become a psychologist myself, and my sister has autism spectrum disorder and paranoia, and she wants to be a therapist/psychologist and work in mental health. Is it viable with people with serious mental disorders to get into mental health and psychology? Ash, I thought this would be interesting for you because you have autism spectrum disorder.
Well, the autistic person for sure should not be a therapist. I don't know what they were thinking.
Yeah, don't corner my market, bro.
Oh my God, both of you, please go into therapy. That sounds amazing. Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind, I have 100 thoughts. The first thing that comes to mind is yes, I, like, by this system of classification, have a mental illness and am a mentally ill.
Fucking mentally ill, bro.
God. Yeah, so I think the issue here is our system of classification that says if you are neurodivergent, you're mentally ill. But also, if you have other things that are quote unquote mental illness, like anxiety or depression, which I've also had throughout my life and have had during the time I've been a therapist, yeah, that makes you a human being. Like, we need real live human beings in the field. We need people who really get it. Now, I think it is important that regardless of what you're doing, something we learned early on in school is, like, never ask a client to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. You should be constantly doing the work. And that is incredibly important. But yes, yes, bring your stuff.
I could never ask a client to eat a Rocky Mountain oyster. Because I'm not going to do that.
I don't know what that is, but I'm concerned.
A Rocky Mountain oyster?
I don't want to know.
I think it's a fried bull testicle.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it would be weird if I was asking a client to do that, but I wouldn't ask them to do it.
I was
without
just
being
letting
willing
you
to do it
know,
myself.
like, if the rule is to not ask a client to do something you wouldn't do yourself, I wouldn't do that to them.
Yeah.
I also wouldn't challenge them to a game of laser tag against me. Because I would never play laser tag against me.
Get crushed.
Yeah, I keep going in there and it's a bunch of 9-year-olds and they fucking get demolished, bro.
You're so good at laser tag.
I just fucking body them, just blast them in the chest.
Oh my god. Yeah. First of all, it's so wrong that we, like, call those things mental illness. The things that were listed, but other things as well. Like, I just think that this whole system needs to be upended. So, and most of the people in the mental health field have something going on in their life, have anxiety or have experienced depression, or, you know, deal with bipolar disorder or autism or OCD or whatever. And yes, the field desperately needs people who really deeply understand what it is to live with those things. Now, you shouldn't do it if you're in a point in your life where that's going to have an impact on your clients in a negative way. Like, if you're needing to ask your clients to hold that for you,
Right.
not fair. But there are some ways in which I have to have accommodations in my practice, and I have asked my clients to make an accommodation for me, which sounds like this. I currently have been sitting on a chair that has a yoga ball for the seat, so that I can bounce up and down during my sessions, and I just let my clients know I might be bouncing up and down during the sessions, and then they accommodate me that way. So it's not a request that's like, will you do this thing that's going to be at a cost of your own mental health?
Right.
But yeah, I think even...
But hey, I'm going to be bouncing a little bit.
Hey,
I
I'm
hope
going
that's
to be
cool.
bouncing, and I hope you don't mind that I have the wiggles, and that's how I need to be today. And
I think that sets a good example because, like, the vast majority of your clients are neurodivergent anyways.
Exactly.
So.
No, I love getting to do that. But again, that's an appropriate way to ask for an accommodation around your quote unquote mental illness that you have. Like, that's an appropriate way to ask for an accommodation. If you're in a space in your life where you would need to do more than that or share your own issues with clients, you need your own therapist first to work through
The
that.
hubris to be like, brains work like this. And if your brain doesn't work exactly like this, you're mentally ill.
Yeah. Yeah, no, our brains, there's just a diversity of human brains. If you look out at a group of people and see the diversity of human bodies, of height and weight and skin color and hair color and eye, and everything that makes people so different, our brains are the same way. Our brains are wired differently. They look differently. They've learned differently. And that's beautiful. Bring that into the counseling space. Please, we need more of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually have a lot of clients who've thought about wanting to be therapists down the road. And I'm always like, do it.
Well,
I love it.
the secret is every therapist I've ever met is like deeply and completely fucked up.
I know. Sorry.
And they've usually gotten like real life-changing help through therapy, and it's been so inspirational to them that they want to do that for other people.
Well, that's so true. I've worked with a lot of like med students or students who are doing something in the medical field, and it's because they want to be a physical therapist because they had physical therapy as a kid and
Right.
it really helped them, or their sister had cancer treatment as a kid and they really want, it's all
It's
about
why
them.
I'm a project manager at a bank, because
Yeah.
just as a little kid, I had a project manager at a bank help me personally, and
Right.
it really inspired me.
Exactly.
Exactly. Y'all share this podcast with your friends. I'm not finding deep meaning in my work.
Oh my god.
All right, moving on to the next question.
Yeah.
I like this one. I got a new therapist. I've been in therapy longer than he's been practicing.
No.
And after 2 sessions, he's already throwing diagnoses. You'd think I would know that word. This is not the first time I've botched that. After 2 sessions, he's diagnosing me. Am I right to be skeptical? So this guy, they go on to explain. He's been a therapist for a year. I've been in therapy for 4 years. Over the years, I've been slapped with a bowl of alphabet soup. The full list of things that have been thrown at me is as follows: inattentive ADHD, bipolar 2, panic disorder, PTSD, GAD, agoraphobia, BPD. Most of these I got put on my after visit summary documents very quickly.
Yeah, this person is probably just neurodivergent, and all of these things are results of them being misunderstood as neurodivergent. So I feel like we could limit that list down a little bit to a couple things.
Yeah, you read all of these and you're like, Jesus, this dude is fucked up, right?
Yeah, and I hear this list and I think, yep, that's related, that's always going to happen if you've been misdiagnosed that way, that's related. Okay, we have a picture of like 1 or 2 things that are going on.
Well, I mean, you and I have even talked about, because I have bipolar 2 and ADHD, at least formally, and like you and I have kind of, you're not really putting this out publicly, but you're starting to think that like ADHD and bipolar are very similar, like they have very similar symptoms, and you're starting to think that those might be very related, if not the
Yes.
same thing.
Yeah, this is definitely, you're not going to find this in the DSM-5, which is a book I hate. So, yeah, and this isn't going to be in any formal diagnostic thing. If you go to your therapist and you're like, I think these 2 things are related, most likely your therapist is going to be like, that's not true. But in my personal experience, years of being a therapist and studying in this field, I always see ADHD and bipolar as related. It doesn't mean if you have ADHD that you're definitely going to be bipolar, but so far I've not met any bipolar clients that we didn't end up figuring out that they have ADHD. And if you do a quick Google, the internet is filled with how to tell ADHD and bipolar apart, because there are so many overlaps, except now it's gotten to this extreme point of dealing with a lot of depression or a
Right.
lack of control around the energy that you have. And if you have to have like 50 articles telling you how to tell 2 things apart because they're so similar, I feel like we should look into that. So that's my conspiracy theory for the day. 2 parts to this question. The first thing that occurs to me, saying I've been in therapy for 4 years, my therapist has only been a therapist for a year. Your therapist has been in school for a very long time, starting with undergrad, where they probably studied something related. A lot of what I've learned a lot of useful things from my psychology degree in undergrad. And then you go through years of grad school.
Right.
And then you go through years of being under supervision. So just because your therapist has only been a therapist for a year and you've been in therapy longer, that's not the deciding factor to me. Now, you might encounter a new therapist to be like, not the therapist for me, that's fine. But you might also encounter somebody who's been a therapist for 15 years ago, not the therapist for me. And that's fine. More years, to me, doesn't make you a better therapist.
I mean, not to toot your horn too loudly, but even with, like, you saw people who had been going to therapy longer than you've been practicing, and they are obsessed with you.
Oh, yeah. When I was an... Yes. When I was an intern... Sorry to just jump right into that. I'm pretty sure social construct... I'm supposed to say, like, no, not me. But, yeah, when I was an intern in school, seeing my very first clients... I had a handful of clients who had been to multiple therapists over the years, and they were like, you're the only therapist who's helped me. So that was me being brand new to what I
Yeah.
was doing and just having a different perspective that was helpful. So it's not the length of time. And I've been to the bad therapy episode that we did a while ago. That was a therapist who's been practicing for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And I've met lots of other therapists who've been practicing for 15, 20, 30 years who I would not recommend as a therapist. And plenty of people who I think have been practicing for a handful of years who I would 100% recommend. In fact, their education's more recent.
That's what I was going to say. Is sometimes when you have somebody who's been practicing for so long, like the field is advancing
Yes.
pretty rapidly, but you've been doing it for 30 years. Sure, you have 30 years of experience, maybe doing something that's super outdated.
Right, that 30 years ago was cutting edge. And if you haven't kept up on the education you need,
Yeah.
man, you got to be in it. And you got to be listening to the people. I want to be learning from autistic people, not autistic professionals. I would learn from professionals who are autistic, but people who 30 years ago learned what autism is and have been doing it that way ever since then,
Yeah.
that's not the person you want to see. I want to learn from people who are autistic sharing about their experiences.
No, a couple years ago, I had a guy working for me who was a developer, a software developer, and he worked in a very outdated system that he had been working in for decades.
Yeah.
And he found work with us because we were supporting a system that used this language that he was proficient in, but the system was extremely outdated.
Yeah.
So like while he happened to find good
He was
work,
the expert in it.
yeah, it was just becoming more and more rare, but he hadn't learned anything new. He was
Yeah.
stuck in like that, and that's so while he provided value in that context, it was a very specific scenario that he was like highly adept at, but getting him to be like
Yeah.
proficient in anything else was impossible because he was like, this is what I do, this is what I've done.
Yes.
I've
Yeah.
been doing this since the 90s.
Absolutely.
Which
Yeah.
in software development timelines is like
Hundreds of years
since
ago.
the wheel was invented.
Right, exactly. So the first part of that isn't the thing I would be most concerned about, although you're welcome to keep it in mind because that therapist hasn't encountered as many different scenarios and you're allowed to care about that, but that wouldn't be the deciding factor. The next point is the diagnosis right out of the gate.
Yeah.
First of all, this person has definitely, in my opinion, not having met them, all of those things, been way overdiagnosed with stuff that's actually very much related and stuff that is categorized as mental illness when we know it's just a result of probably a neurological difference in their brain and probably trauma as well. So yes, they have suffered overdiagnosis. I would suspect, again, I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't know them, but that would be a good guess. I see that happen a lot.
Yeah.
And then the other part of this is what you should know if you see a therapist who works with insurance, you see them through insurance, they have to have an official diagnosis from the first time you meet. Imagine being able to get out enough to get an accurate diagnosis in the first session when the other things you have to do in a first session are go over all of the ethical guidelines, review, go over family history, all this stuff, and then you have to give an accurate diagnosis to insurance. It's ridiculous. It's one of the many reasons I won't work with insurance. I think that's highly inappropriate. I don't want to give a diagnosis day one. Even if we both are pretty aware of what we think is going on. I don't want to give a diagnosis day one. So that clinician is probably required to do that day one. And if the person is frustrated with that, there's a much larger issue. Of course you're frustrated, it's highly inappropriate, and that is the way the system functions with insurance. So yes, I think that's inappropriate. Yes, they should be concerned. That's going to happen.
To all of our listeners who are getting therapy but you have to do it through insurance. I get it. I've been there.
Yeah, how else could you afford it?
Don't overthink your diagnosis. I know that's incredibly difficult to do, but if you've been slapped with 18 different diagnoses, that's just the nature of that's a feature of the system that you're stuck in, not necessarily reflective of what's actually going on with your brain. So take that with a grain of salt. They have to diagnose you.
Yeah,
they have to.
That's a good reframe on that. If you do have to use insurance, I wouldn't put too much levity in the diagnosis that you're given. They just have to give you something, and they have to give you a diagnosis that will then allow them to do a treatment plan that works for you. And so if you give a really mild diagnosis, you might not be able to do a lot of treatment. So if you're wanting more help and assistance, it might, like all of that stuff impacts each other.
Yeah.
So that's really important to keep in mind.
The other thing to remember is a diagnosis doesn't change the brain that you have.
Yeah, a diagnosis is just a descriptor of what's already happening. It's not prescriptive of who you're going to be.
Yeah.
That's such a good point.
Yeah. Because I remember that. I was like, I really desperately wanted a diagnosis because I was paying out of pocket, and she wouldn't diagnose me because therapists don't want to diagnose you out the rip because they don't want to, like, dig a hole that you live in for the rest of your life that you've been like
with your insurance company and
yeah, this thing was held over your head for the rest of time that you've been diagnosed as this thing, so when I say I'm being diagnosed with like bipolar disorder, that's anecdotal. I have not been formally diagnosed with anything, thank God. That's not on any paperwork for me as of right now, and it's nice. Why are you looking at me like that?
It is on your insurance paperwork, and we've been denied coverage for things because of that diagnosis on your insurance.
Who let me start a podcast if I'm going to get shit like this wrong?
Well, that's a big reason, because that happened before I was practicing as a counselor. It was a big reason I didn't want to work with insurance, because you have a diagnosis on your insurance, and we've been denied coverage.
You could be like, Price, stop the recording. Let me correct you. Let me get this straight with you, and then we can record it so you sound like a god amongst men who never gets anything wrong.
Price, you are a god amongst men.
Thank you.
You're
I feel like I deserve that right now.
You absolutely
I'm not embarrassed about my
love you.
mistake at all.
No, but that's a big deal that can happen. I know a lot of people need to use insurance. Counseling is very cost prohibitive. I totally understood, but know that yes, diagnosis has to happen right out of the gate. But the other thing to keep in mind with this therapist is, once again, they haven't just been doing this for a year.
Yeah.
They spent a long time studying diagnosis in school, so they've been dealing with that for years.
Right. I had a question here that I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage of complex trauma cases do you say, okay, you're good now? In my view, you have recovered fully from your trauma. Okay. It's an interesting question because it brings up a couple of things. What is the healing process from severe trauma? Is there ever a threshold you can cross where you are in fact healed? Like that, it brings up a lot of good points that I would love to hear your thoughts on, because you do specialize in trauma.
Yeah.
So do you ever feel like, okay, you're good, like, sorry that happened to you when you were a kid, and sorry your house just burned down, but like, get out there, champ, you're you're better,
So first of all, the difference, they mentioned complex PTSD, so that's CPTSD, and then there's also just PTSD. PTSD is usually about some sort of isolated incident. You might have lived a great, happy life with a great, happy childhood and good, supportive parents.
You got in one awful car accident, and now you struggle to drive.
Exactly. It's now impacted this one area of your life.
Yeah.
That is more in alignment with what PTSD is. If you have an ongoing child abuse sort of situation or neglect, just not getting your needs met, whatever it is, you might end up, or in like a highly religious there are a lot of different things that can contribute to this. It doesn't have to be outright abuse. But if you had ongoing issues that never really got resolved, where you didn't have a solid caretaker who was able to help give you the firm footing that you needed, that's more in alignment with CPTSD.
Okay.
So that's the difference there. And the answer to this is just, when do they feel ready to proceed without therapy? That's not really my decision. We're probably going to wait for there to be some change, because if they're coming to therapy right now in this moment, it's probably because something is stuck in their life. They're like, either they've just discovered all this trauma, or we're just unveiling it in therapy, or or they had therapy previously and now they're coming back because there's a new stuck area. They're in a new relationship, or they just had a breakup, they've started a new job, something changed, and they're back feeling stuck again. So we're going to get to where they feel like things have shifted. And then at that point, either they're like, okay, now there's more I want to discover and explore,
Or they're like, I'm good right now. Thanks. My life is moving again. My friendships are working. Work is working. All those things. Off I go. And maybe I see them again in a year. The most important thing to keep in mind for me is that while PTSD is a little bit more of like a single layer, and if you really get through and process that event, you might really feel like you have fully left that event behind. Maybe down the road you get into another car accident and it feels like it brings up that event. But CPTSD is always unfolding. And I think that in my life, I've been diagnosed with CPTSD. I know that I have that. I guess I could have known that without the diagnosis, but I've also had somebody confirm that for me. It's unfolding as you encounter new events. So I think parts of trauma come out when you get into a relationship, and parts of trauma come out when you have a big fight, and parts of trauma come out when you have your first kid. And so you probably will end up being in therapy on and off throughout your life, or you can stay consistently in therapy the whole time. But you're probably going to continue to have that come up because it founded the way that you view the world.
Mm. Yeah, they say in the post, in my reading of PTSD therapy, I see phrases like functional, i.e. they can hold down a job and take care of themselves, and symptom reduction, but not full symptom remission.
Yeah.
So this person's like, will I ever get better?
Well, once again, that sort of terminology is dealing with the insurance terms, and insurance's job is just to get you out and working again, basically. So that, yeah, you don't have an end goal of being in complete like remission from symptoms or whatever. I think that to me, I just come back again to the fact that it's unfolding. Yeah, I think there are some things that you can really feel past, but if almost every day of your childhood was covered by being in an unsafe environment, you're just going to keep encountering things that bring that up for you again.
You're fucked. You heard it here from your therapist. It ain't ever getting better. You're fucked.
Well, I encounter that in my life, is that often now in my life, things are great all of the time. Like I just get to have good days back to back to back, but man, then something will come through and just like knock my feet off.
I'll still go to give you a high five and you flinch like I'm gonna slap you across the face.
Yeah.
It's never happened. Have I ever slapped you across the face before?
My body sure thinks so, but no, you have not.
But you act like it's a regular thing.
You've never done it, you've never threatened to, you've never pretended to, but my body, and I haven't been slapped like that before in my life, but my body doesn't feel like I'm safe around somebody bigger and stronger than me.
Oh God, you must never feel safe around here.
Yep.
Why didn't you marry a little pipsqueak or something?
I don't want a little pipsqueak, I'm into you.
Okay.
You're a god amongst men.
But you're scared of me?
A little.
See, this is why I have to like move very slowly. If I'm coming around the corner, I gotta let you know. If I'm going to high five, I go really slow now. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna high five you. I'll give you a little warning.
But I think you'll see sometimes in my life I'm reactive to that, and sometimes in my life I'm fine. I am able to be more present and not as reactive to
It's
it.
definitely related to like the level of stress you're facing in that moment.
But let me give some hope to this person. Like, yes, I think that when you have CPTSD, it's always going to be unfolding. You're going to encounter new scenarios. I think that you can gain the skills to be able to show yourself a lot of kindness and be able to get through. And also, there is happiness on the other side.
Yeah.
Like, there is true, deep, abounding happiness that is out there for you that's possible for you, even if you had a childhood filled with something that didn't feel safe.
Bless you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I think that you're not fucked. You're going to be okay. But it is going to be a complicating issue in your life, and that's tough, and have a good support system for that.
That was a good answer. I want to give you a high five. Here it comes. Raising my hand.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait, that was bad.
Third time's the charm.
Third
You just
time's
held
the
your
charm.
hand still so I could. All right.
Oops.
All right. This is one that I love. This is one that's near and dear to my heart. This is one that I think about with my therapist. and something I'm really curious to get your thoughts on. We've got about 15 minutes left. This might be the last question for the episode.
Okay. Are we gonna do a 2-part episode, or are we gonna do?
Yeah, I've got plenty of questions.
Okay.
I've got like 4 times as many as we needed apparently. So,
Okay.
but this one I'm actually kind of amped up
Okay.
to hear your answer on this. Therapists, how honest are you with your clients? And they give some clarity in what they're asking. Do you tell them if they're not helping themselves, that they are being too needy, that they're emailing you too much, when they're self-sabotaging, when they're being an asshole? Like, do you ever just tell your client, like, hey, you're being an asshole, you know, in this situation you're describing? Like, how honest are you with your clients? And the reason I want to hear that is because the best conversations I've ever had with a therapist is when they are able to just tell me, hey, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. And one of the biggest complaints we hear consistently from people who listen to the podcast is like, my therapist just wants me to vent and never gives me any feedback.
Yes.
You know, I'm just there to vent, and like I could just vent to a brick wall. Like, why am I paying to have somebody be like, how do you feel about that? You know, like that's bullshit. So, what's your take on this?
I think that's like a multi-layer answer. I don't think you should ever be dishonest with your clients. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that you should be dishonest with your clients. The next layer of that to me is, I think that sometimes throughout our lives we get told that people being deeply unkind to us and putting their own perspective of a situation over our own is nice, and that's what honesty is. But that's not what honesty is. Somebody just always accusing you of being an asshole or being overly needy is just one perspective of the fact that you're a human being who has needs and is allowed to have that going on. So I don't think that being honest with clients and even being direct with clients is going to be the same thing as what some people have been taught is honesty, which is just being put down all of the time.
I'm sorry, bro. You're an asshole. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
Just being honest. You're a fucking asshole sometimes. You know.
Well, what do they do with that? Like, that's just to be unkind to somebody and just to like again affirm that narrative that like they're the fuck up, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't find that useful, but I do think that sometimes people need something direct. I've never told a client that they're overly needy, because even my clients with a lot of needs, they have a lot of needs. They don't have a lot of support in their life. And I love getting to have a practice that's flexible around that. I can have clients with high needs and have space for that. And then I have a lot of clients with very low needs. And so that takes up very little of my like weekly energy.
Right, sure.
And I have more space for the clients who at that moment in their life have high needs. And then what I see is those needs start getting met, they become a lower support needs client. That's great. That's awesome. I love getting to have the time and space and extra energy for somebody and then watching them move through to being somebody who's reaching out less and less. And maybe they go in and out of that, and that's all fine and allowed. I have boundary setting is important. So if I have a client who's messaging a lot or emailing a lot, if it really is impacting the time that I have available or the energy that I have available to give in that moment, I just let them know, hey, I love that you're using this support. I'm not available for a phone call this weekend, or I'm not available to be texting, but I'm making a note and we'll talk about it in
But you never
session.
tell them to stop texting.
No.
And you never tell
they
them to
don't
stop
need to stop
emailing.
texting.
That doesn't, yeah, that's so ridiculous. If a therapist is like, you've got to stop emailing me, that's like beyond the pale. It doesn't cost them anything to receive an email,
It
right?
has nothing to do with me. The fact that you have a lot to get out right now has nothing to do with me. That to me is controlling. My boundary that I can share with you, and again, a boundary is not telling you what to do.
Yeah.
It's telling you what I'm available to give, will be, hey, keep sending as many emails as you need. I want you to know I'm not going to be able to check them this week. So if there's an emergency, I need you to use X, Y, or Z, wait, tap the microphone, system instead.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I love getting all these texts for you. I'm making a note and I'm putting them in your file so that
when we meet on Monday, we'll be able to talk about it.
Right, because the problem isn't that they're reaching out. The problem would be if you didn't have good boundaries around the expectation of you replying.
Right. The problem has been that I've done a poor job setting boundaries, and they think that I'm readily available all the time, and I'm not.
And a lot of people think it's on them to anticipate people's boundaries, but it's not.
That's everybody. All the time, clients are like, I'm so sorry if I'm using this too much. And I'm like, it's not your job to know when I'm busy.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You don't know when I'm busy. Some weekends, I got nothing to do. I love responding to some text messages from clients, or some weeknights or whatever. But sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm busy, or sometimes I'm tired.
Yeah.
It's not their job to keep up with. That is my job, and it's my job to communicate that. So, like you said, if you have a therapist telling you, like, email me less, it's because they've set a bad boundary and they're asking you to be responsible for it, and that's not fair.
Right.
I'm responsible for the boundary. You email 100 times if you need to. Do I have time to read 100 emails? No. So I'm going to let you know that. Maybe I won't have time to read through all of these. Can you tell me the most important ones when we get to session, and we'll talk about those? I don't have clients in 100 emails, but you know.
I've had people I work with, you like message them on Skype or whatever, and they're like, could you not message me? I'm in a meeting. Well, could you minimize the fucking window, moron?
Hey,
Sorry, I get it. That was an emotional. Went to an emotional.
That was a real response, and I hear you. Heard.
I saw a face in my mind when I said that.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's not your job to keep up with my boundaries or my level of energy or availability. Alice, stop. I guess I don't have that.
Attacking your hand.
It's my job to protect my own boundaries and to communicate that to you. There have been times, I'm honestly struggling to think of it because it's so rare. There have been times where a client was about to do something that I was like, this is about to be immediately harmful. And instead of telling them no, I say, can I point out something I'm really worried about with this situation? Can we talk that through? But it's still their decision. It's their life.
Yeah.
I will just occasionally see the consequences down the road and go, ooh, can we talk through one thing I'm worried about? Are you able to hear that? And they'll be like, yes, and we'll talk through it. And then they can make the decision. But sometimes they're like, oh, that's a good point. I don't want that. And then they come up with the other thing. But clients are so much more brilliant and so much more creative and so much more able to solve their own issues than I think a lot of therapy gives people credit for.
For sure.
If I'm able to communicate honestly about, oh, here's the thing I'm worried about, then people will take that into their own hands. But they know their life better than I do.
With a few minutes left, there's something I want to bring up. It's not really an announcement, but something I'm excited to share with the listeners is that you're going to be a speaker
Oh,
at an upcoming Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion conference for the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, or the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce. They're having
that's being hosted in Charlotte.
Yeah. So you're going to be talking to a bunch of employers about how to create a better working environment for neurodivergent people in their workforce.
This is a really important thing about counseling or being a counselor that I learned about when I was in school, and it's one of the... Then I don't think it's pushed after that at all, and I think it ought to be. But as a therapist, you're also an advocate, and so it's really important that I'm advocating for my community. Do I think it's thrilling to talk to a bunch of business people about business practices? That's not my field. That's not me. I don't love it. But I see a lot of clients struggle in the workplace, and I think one way that I can be an advocate is step in as a therapist and say, here's how your neurodivergent employees' brains work, and here's how you can provide an environment that actually is inclusive to them.
Right.
And I'm really excited to get to do that. Really, really nervous, guys, but really excited to get to do that.
I don't know why you're nervous. You're gonna crush it.
It's gonna be fine. I'm really nervous about fitting into my 45-minute time limit, if I'm honest. I'm nervous about talking too much.
Yeah. Well, you're not going up there. I love your approach. You're not going up there to tell them what to do in their environment, their work environment.
Oh, yeah.
You're going up there to just tell them how these folks' brains work and trust that they're smart enough to apply that information well.
I'm gonna, the couple of main points I want to make are to advocate for like there's a huge diversity in the way that your employees' brains work. It's not just one or two mental illnesses that we can call out. Everybody has a brain that in some way differs because we all have diversity in our bodies and brains. But here's why listening to accommodation needs matters. Here's why being creative in the way you're willing to apply accommodations. Here's why waiting for a diagnosis to be sent to you doesn't actually make a lot of sense, because so many of these, you know, if you have somebody who's autistic, they need support now, not in 2 years when they can get their assessment done.
Right.
So I'm going to really advocate for just like listening to their employees and understanding that everybody benefits from neurodiverse accommodation or neurodivergent accommodations, like having information in writing and having your job description laid out for you in a clear way, and being safe to ask questions and all those things.
And something that I want, a lesson I've been learning through this process, because we like brainstormed this together and reached out to them. They didn't reach out to us. We reached out to them and asked if you could speak, and they were delighted to have you. For the listeners, you know, Ash's kind of beginning your career, beginning your practice, you know, beginning establishing yourself as an expert in this space. Nobody comes along and tells you that you're an expert in your space.
Yeah, you don't get like a letter.
You don't get a letter, you don't get a pen, you don't get a certificate. You are, you know, it's like our friend Courtney, who is literally on the board of play therapy, and she's like, I'm kind of new, like she's on the board, she's on the fucking board, like she's really good at what she does.
She's got experience that really matters in this space.
Yeah, and you're the same way, where you're like just getting started, but people are like, what we're doing on this podcast is resonating with people. What you're doing for your clients is like resonating with people. Like, we have people tell us that they see our website and get emotional. Or I'm sorry, I say our website. It's your website. But they see your website and they get emotional because of the way that you're talking about these things and how you offer support to neurodivergent people. Folks, if you're listening, nobody comes along and tells you you're an expert in something. That's something you decide for yourself, and you start telling people who you are. Yeah. So no matter what stage of life you're in or what you're doing, you get to decide who you are and how you want to be treated, and you put that out into the world.
And a signal of you knowing a lot about something is really understanding how much you don't know. People who are very new to a space tend to have a lot more confidence than the people who are really in that field and know a lot about it and realize how much they don't know. There are so many areas of working with neurodivergent folks that I don't know. Recently, I've been getting input from a dietitian who specializes in working with neurodivergent folks, and I'm asking questions for my clients. How can we improve in these areas?
Right.
I'm wanting to connect with like people who do occupational therapy and people who are experts in these particular areas, but it is because of my knowledge in this space that I know, wow, I don't know anything about this bit. Let me learn more about it. And that's been exciting. So if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling that imposter syndrome, it's honestly probably because you know a lot about the thing you're talking about.
Yeah, and I know you're feeling imposter syndrome going into the... But you're going to go to these business folks, and you're going to be able to educate them on your bread and butter, the thing you know the most about, and in a meaningful way, in a way that's going to help.
You guys, let me tell you why I'm so nervous about this. I'm joking. I mean, I am worried about talking over because I do tend to talk over. Here we go right now. But, guys, I've gotten to so embrace who I am now. I just feel so in my space. Like, my dream for doing this presentation is like shoes off, in my comfy clothes, probably hanging from my sensory swing, and just getting to talk frankly about things. And that's not what I think is welcome in the business field, you know, with businessy people. So wish me luck. I'm going to do my best.
Set an example, you know?
Well, that's exactly what I'm hoping to do. There is a part of me that's like, where can I show up as authentically as possible? Because me playing into the like, yep, you should force all of your neurodivergent people into the same neurotypical box you put everybody in, not super helpful. So I think part of my advocacy is maybe wearing something comfier and more accessible to me, and hanging from my sensory swing. So we'll see.
Well, I think that about wraps us up for today. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I just am so delighted in the people who are like showing up and listening to this podcast and who are talking to other people about it and who are wanting to explore their mental health in a different way and get to enter into this framework that says you're not broken. And I'm grateful for the people who reach out and say something, but yeah, I'm just like excited for people in this world who are showing up to want to think differently about things. That means a lot to me. And if you're dealing with any of the issues we talked about today, again, like you're not broken.
Right.
And those things are such a benefit to this world and so necessary in this world. And there's hope on the other side of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Ash, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time.
Price, thank you for your time.
And we'll see you next time on I Married Your Therapist. Man, I would love to be reading Raid Shadow Legend ads to people.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, check out the new video game. Yeah, no, it's about Baldur's Gate 3. That's all it is. Baldur's Gate 3.
All of my clients are playing Baldur's Gate 11.
As soon as we stop recording this, I'm going to go play Baldur's Gate 3.
I know.
My goal is for my character to have sex with as many of my party members as possible.
I love it. Go get it. We got to get you to
The
that
fate
right
of the
now.
universe hangs in the balance, and I'm like, let's get down.